get a state. McCain's campaign and Buchanan's campaign in '96 were the two campaigns they looked at. I had the honor of working on Buchanan's campaign in '96.
Oh, were you there?
I was the deputy campaign manager. One of the last events were actually in this room where it was crazy. It was 1,000 people. You knew, you could just feel.
Wait, was this the victory celebration?
No, it was 2 days before the victory in this.
Because the victory celebration may have been one of the greatest I've ever seen, where he said, "Don't wait for orders from headquarters. Run to the sound of gunfire." I was walking through my apartment in Washington, D.C. in Congress, and I just turned and stopped. I said, "What the hell did he just say?" And I went in.
You forgot the Pitchfork Park.
Yeah, the Pitchforks. Pat is a
Run to the
dear,
sound
dear
of the
friend of
guns.
mine, and I've told Pat that was one of the great victory speeches I've ever heard, simultaneously exciting the base and scaring the absolute hell out of everybody else on the planet.
Yeah.
It
Exactly.
was awesome. But anyway, so you were here with Buchanan. Talk about that, and talk about, again, what lessons from the Buchanan campaign, for instance.
It's the hard work. It's the dedication. It's the willingness to go and meet people in a coffee shop and then go and shake someone's hand that's a factory owner or a factory worker. That hard work and that willingness to dedicate yourself to the state, the people, and not just take it for granted, to come in and actually try to make that connection. That's what it takes to win this state. That's what it takes to win the early states. And that's why it's so important, because you really get to test who a candidate is and who they are and what kind of person they are. Not just what kind of a team they surround themselves with, not the best speech that they have, what kind of person they are.
So
and that type of commitment is so key.
Let's talk really quickly about ideology, and then I want to get to you, Andy, but Michael, really quickly on ideology versus personality in New Hampshire, in the process. In 2008, I'll be honest, I wasn't a big John McCain fan. I thought he enjoyed sort of sticking, people in the eye, the conservatives in the eye a bit too much, and he kept campaigning against Bush's tax cuts, which I supported, and I was sure in the live free or die state that was going to, do John McCain in against Mitt Romney. Romney came out and supported the Bush tax cuts, but McCain won again in 2008. And I sat there going, wait, but I thought that it was all about live free or die. But in that case, how do you explain that?
Well, talk about ideology shift. So Buchanan in '96, Santorum in 2012. I was with Rudy Giuliani in 2008.
How did that work out?
And that's an actual very good example of somebody that completely didn't get New Hampshire and totally decided at one point that they were just going to pull out of here and try to go to Florida and make that their last stand. But you bring up a good point, because I think issues obviously matter, but the character of the person matters as well. And we get to test that here. And I think that's why New Hampshire's a little bit different. It's not only about the issues, it's about the quality of the person as well, and the authenticity, wow, I couldn't get that word out, of the candidate, and I think that is extremely important.
Well, Joe, I think, but Mike, to your point, I think it's well taken that ideology, matters a great deal, obviously. But John McCain had kind of been through the war up here in 2000. Right. He had proven himself that New Hampshire voters had a reservoir of goodwill towards him, and so.
So even if he wasn't right on the Bush tax cuts, they're going to overlook that.
Right. And so when his campaign essentially imploded that summer of 2007. He doubled down. He said, I'm going to come to New Hampshire. I'm going to get in my truck, and I'm just going to drive around. And he relied on that goodwill and that kind of that reservoir there, and he drew upon it, and it got him a victory.
My dad would always say in 2007, everybody said McCain's campaign was over. He'd go, Joey. Now, this is the guy, of course, who voted against me in 1994. So I didn't, I could took it with a grain of salt. He goes, Joey, you watch that McCain. He's going to do it. He's going to do it. And he did. He came back, and he did it here. I wanted to ask you, Andy, how important is New Hampshire to Rand Paul if Rand decides to go ahead and throw his hat in the ring and run?
I would say it's going to be an important state, but I wanted to touch on something we talked about a second ago, which is why New Hampshire? Why would we tell people to continue having the first in the nation test here? In addition to the traditions that we have, let's look at it from a tactical standpoint. you can drive from one end of the state to the other and back in one day. We have one media market, really only a few major players in the print media. And so with a small amount of money and the tenacity that we've discussed here, you know, a startup candidate, and Mike, you know from your experience, you can really make your mark here in a state because of those, because of the way the field is set up, that you just couldn't in other states. So, I mean, you know, to test a person's personality and to find out the kind of person they are, really this is the state where that proving ground is naturally because of all these things we've talked about, you know, and I think that in itself is a very strong reason. And of course, you know, people here take it very, very seriously. But to get back to your other point, you know, Senator Paul's campaign, if he chooses to have one, I think we'll have a good head start here because of the good work that we put in with Congressman Paul's presidential campaign in 2012. And, you know, I think the constituency here is a natural fit for his message, so we'll see what happens.
No announcements today, Andy?
I don't have any, so don't look to me for anything. Sorry to disappoint everybody.
All right, we're going to open it up to questions in a minute. Fred, you mind if I ask you really quickly, what's the first campaign you covered in New Hampshire? 1980. 80? Yeah. So we're here. Please tell me you were in this town when Reagan grabbed the mic.
I was here.
Oh, good Lord. I know this is, if I were Jack Kemp, I would say, what would he ask the speaker? Could you talk about that for 1 second? You mind coming up here just for 1 second and tell us about that moment?
No, I don't need to come up, but it was the first night.
Oh, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Hey, Fred, I hate to break it to you, buddy, but your voice is not that booming. Here we go.
That was the worst night in George Bush's career. Remember, he was the guy with the big mo. Yeah. He'd won Iowa. And when he got here, and that night he was he'd been tricked by the Reagan campaign, and when Howard Baker and Bob Dole and all the people who were not in the debate marched in, it was great drama, and Bush never recovered. It was over. Nashua ended the campaign.
Did you know that was the defining, did everybody in the gym know at the time that was the defining moment? Could you tell that Reagan, after losing Iowa, was going to come storming back and win it here?
Well, you knew he was coming back and was probably going to win in New Hampshire, but nothing like he did. Yeah. And Bush was so flummoxed that night. It was delightful to watch. It was fun.
All right. Thank you very much. You guys remember that?
Oh, yeah, I was the campus co-chair for George Bush back on my left wing.
Oh, you really?
So I remember it well.
Wow. How did that work out? You know, it's interesting, though. You look at Bush in 1980. You look at W in 2000. You look at Romney in 2008. It's not always the favorite son. It's not the person that grew up around here that wins. I mean, you got to do more than just have the right geography.
I think New Hampshire has proven that it gives everyone a fair shot. You know, even a guy that works in MSNBC if he wanted to. So I think we're pretty open-minded.
Let me just say right now. I really don't think we can get Al Sharpton up here, but I will ask. And all right, with that, let's open it up for questions. Yes, sir. By the way, if you're ever at the podium, beware of the person who raises their hands before you even ask, are there any questions? And that's you today, sir. Go ahead.
I want to thank you very much for keeping my wife, as Chris Matthews would say, a tingle every morning.
Oh, my gosh. Listen, listen, I don't know what they're saying out there, Bobby, but I categorically deny it.
You should announce right now.
I know. It's never going to get any better than this.
Joe Mentum.
All right. Okay. All right, thank you.
Conventional wisdom of who comes in second with half a point and we're behind the other guy, or what he was supposed to
Right.
Gets knocked down by the next candidate du jour. And do you think that's in the best interest of the party and the American people?
Well, I don't think so. I think the obsession with the first contest, and I said this on national TV, Iowa, the obsession for like a year and a half. We're talking about a year and a half. Well, who's ahead in Iowa, and that's going to make a big difference elsewhere, and da-da-da-da-da. I think that's misplaced. I think sort of this horse race scenario that you're talking about isn't in the best interest of the party. And let me pass it around, because you actually, you saw it. You guys are down. Rick Santorum's finished. He wins Iowa.
I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on the tingle.
Yeah, I know. Listen, I got to tell you, brother, it just happens. I mean, husbands all over. Never mind. Go ahead.
No, you're right. Rick's path was it was different, because Iowa on election night, we were down 8 votes. They called victory. We leave there, we come here, it's a completely different story. Most of our resources were in Iowa. We had to all of a sudden start building a campaign again. And it wasn't until South Carolina election day that they ended up announcing that Rick was the winner in Iowa. So we had lost some of that momentum, that bump that we would have got. We were told that we would have been on the front page of Time. It would have been probably a different story coming into here. But you're right, the media was kind of playing that game the whole time. I mean, it was Newt Gingrich, it was Herman Cain for a while, and then it was Ron Paul for a while, and then all of a sudden it's Rick, and it happened to be Rick at the right moment in Iowa, and then happened to be Rick again in Colorado, Missouri, and Minnesota when we won. If we didn't win those 3 states, we would have never made it, because you got to remember, we lost South Carolina, we lost Florida, we lost Nevada. It was kind of looking like, where do we go from here?
Right, and I'll tell you also, a lot of it is cynical about ratings. They see a horse race, and that's going to make the most sense. Another part of it, though, I think has to do with media bias, and I've said this on MSNBC, so this is no great shock, especially early in the primary process, presidential primary process. There will be these candidates that will come out. There will be these flaming supernovas. They will say outrageous things. They will get a quick following. They'll shoot up in the polls. They're not going to be sustained, but they are sustained for a few weeks by the national media talking about it. And the national media is talking about it because it's fun to say, look how bizarre this person is. And they keep talking about it. And soon, I think we had like 6, 7, 8 people who at one point were in first place. And this week it's Michelle Bachmann. The next week it's Herman Cain. Next week it's Donald Trump. Next week it's this. And they'd always turn to me, they go, what's happening to your party? And I would say, nothing's happening to our party. I wrote an op-ed in Politico called Crazy Never Wins. Crazy never wins. People will come out and they will say crazy things, and they will say it because they think it will get them a job on TV, or it will help them sell more books, or it will make them make more money on the speech circuit, but it will not help them win primaries like New Hampshire. But the media loves it because not only does it drive ratings, this crazy person grabbing their 15 minutes of fame, it reinforces what they really believe Republicans are like. And so they would always turn to me and go, well, gee, what's happened to your party? And I said, I don't know.
The media loves to do
They love that.
The build up and
build
tear
up,
down.
knock
tear
down. And
I mean,
they especially love it when the Republican candidate they build up is a fringe candidate, and then they can write stories about what happened to the GOP.
But, I mean, they're going to do it. They're going to demonize almost anybody, I think. I mean, because as soon as you get to a point where they've built you up, then a lot of them in the media, and it's not all of them. I mean, I've met some incredible people in the media.
Right.
You'd be one of them.
Well, thank you. I thought you were incredible, too, and that was a nice lunch.
It was
I appreciate
a good lunch. No tingle, but it was.
No tingle, but that's okay.
But, no,
that comes at dinner. But anyway.
I think we should transition.
Later.
Andy?
Andy, what do you think? We'll leave it there.
Well, I agree, and a lot of times there's 2 parts of the campaign or more, obviously, and one big part of it is the folks that deal with the media and try to manage that process and push the message along in the narrative that the campaign wants, and the rest of us that talk to voters and make the voter contact happen. you know, we're sort of left in the bubble where, you know, we're trying to work in between all these different parts, and it does cause some problems. And, you know, from my perspective, not working with the media, it's interesting to see how they build it up just to bring it down. And, you know, Congressman Paul is a great example. You know, no one cares about Congressman Paul until you start threatening something, and then we got to bring this guy down. We got to start talking about all the crazy stuff about Ron Paul, and it's like, well, I mean, what's the point? I don't understand. You know, it's just, and with everybody too, Herman Cain and Michelle Bachmann, they just build it up to bring it down, and it's an unfortunate part of our process, but those of us that work with the voters directly, we just do what we have to do.
Yep.
You know?
Another question? Yes, ma'am. You know, I will, and then I'd love for you guys to comment on it. In '94, when I first ran and nobody knew who I was, yes, and it would have been nice to have one person that actually mattered give me an endorsement. They didn't, and I'm serious. And this proves the point that we had the Escambia County Republican Club meeting that was going to set up a debate. There were 155 people that were elected to it. We had 7 candidates on the Republican side, and they called me up because I didn't go to that meeting. And they said, hey, Joe, listen, we're trying to negotiate debate rules, but there was nobody here that supported you. So could we debate? I said, how many people were there? They said, 155. I said, there wasn't a single one there? No. And they thought I would be insulted, and I started laughing because I knew, you know, I'd been knocking on 10,000 doors. I just started laughing, and I negotiated. So in my experience, I've just never had an endorsement that mattered to me. I didn't think so. I will say back in 2010, I think Sarah Palin's endorsement moved the meter for Nikki Haley in South Carolina. I think there are limited cases where endorsements matter, but for the most part, you know what? People do a lot better knocking on doors of star Republican voters than go into the legislature saying, hey, will you support me? What do you guys think?
Well, let me just, you talked about the media. Endorsements from a presidential standpoint are done 90% for the media and for the power brokers in Washington, D.C., for the money. It's for the media and the money. You have to prove yourself a credible candidate. And how do you do that? Early in a campaign, you go down, you try to get the county sheriffs, the county commissioners, the state reps, state senators, governors, all the elected officials. You try to get as many of them as you can. And who do you roll them out to? You don't roll them out. You do roll them out in New Hampshire, but we know people don't really care about that because they're going to have an opportunity to talk to the candidates. You're rolling it out to D.C., to the power brokers, the money people, and to the media, and to establish credibility. There are times when endorsements do matter, and Mike, this goes back to the Buchanan race. I ran a thing called the Conservative Political Victory Fund, and we had Rush Limbaugh up here for a dinner one night. And about a few hours before the dinner, my friend Dave Carney hands me a videotape and says, President Reagan would like you to run this at your dinner. And I opened it up, I put it on, and it's Reagan endorsing Bush. Now that's an endorsement that mattered.
Yeah.
It put me in a tough spot with all the other people on the podium.
That would be a pretty good one.
Yeah.
All right.
Completely agree with what Paul's saying about, you know, what the purpose of endorsements are. You know, it helps establish early credibility, you know, in the minds of the media and the folks in Washington that may have some money that they want to share with your campaign, which is critical. So they can create momentum at times, but to me, there are very few endorsements in New Hampshire that are game changers. We've always talked over years about, you know, well, Senator so-and-so is going to endorse, and there's a big organization that comes with it. Well, it's just not so. You know, the best thing you can do with an endorsement in my mind is, you know, for every big name you get, you know, it's your local town activist. You know, you care because, you know, you care about your candidate. Clone yourself. They're the ones that are doing the phones, that are doing the doors, that are doing the emails, that are doing the letters. Those are the kinds of endorsements. If you can clone yourself as an activist, then that's going to kind of grow your campaign. There is a purpose, but it's somewhat limited, and I think they're overrated. And the media makes much more of endorsements sometimes than really they ought to.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yes, ma'am.
Joe, this has to be the last
singing a quartet.
Yeah, exactly. Singing senators. Go ahead.
Losing my
worked out
voice.
well.
Do you think the media is beginning to fall out of love with Obama? Do they still think these are phony scandals? Or is there some questioning going on?
You know, I've always found it ironic, and this goes back to something that Michael says about building candidates up to knock them down. I find it ironic that in my dealings in Washington, D.C., and I'd be surprised, Fred, if you feel the same way, the two presidents in my lifetime who have, other than Nixon, who have hated the media the most have been Democrats that the media coronated in the general election. The Clintons were so used to being the new Democrats and the hope for a new generation that the second they crossed that threshold and were sworn in, they were shocked the first day the media started actually doing their job and asking about, I think it was Zoe Baird. Remember, there were 3 or 4 of these scandals in the first 3 or 4 days. And it's the same thing with the Obamas. For the life of me, I can't figure out why Barack Obama is so prickly toward the press, because they absolutely adored him. But I personally think that they committed malpractice during the 2008 campaign especially, and the second he got sworn in, suddenly some of them snapped to and remembered what their job was. So, yeah, I think they've fallen out. I think they've fallen out of love with him. Will they treat a Republican crisis differently than a Democratic crisis? Yes. Will that ever change? Michael will answer that question now.
No.
Nope.
Maybe.
Yeah, there you go.
No, you know, I think you're right, but a lot of it, to the premise of your question too, and you were talking about this, I think the people you surround yourself with in the White House, I think, makes a huge difference, and how they handle things, and the way that the Obama administration has kind of clamped down on everything and tried to control everything from the pictures that are taken. You know, obviously then there's the scandals and the spying and some of the stuff that was going on. But I think that has a lot to do with why they have actually fallen out of favor, because they've tried to control it too much. They're trying to hold on to that little bit of control that they have. You know, they see things slipping away, and they're trying to grab onto it so much that it's slipping out of their fingers.
And you know, that's a great point. The last 2 presidents and administrations had a goal when they came in of not expanding their base of friends close in. They wanted to keep that bubble close in, and I think it was a real problem. Ronald Reagan, we were talking a lot about Reagan and Bush. You know, one of the reasons why Reagan was, I think, a great president is that he, you know, after getting rid of George H.W. Bush, what did he do? He said, hey, that James Baker guy, he's pretty good. The guy who was trying to kill him politically, Reagan reached out to and wasn't afraid to bring him in. I mean, how important is that? You're already in a bubble when you're a president anyway. But to not want to expand the group of people close to you to give you advice seems to be deadly.
It's very dangerous, I think, for you know, any candidate or any elected official of any party to, you know, essentially surround themselves with yes men and yes women that tell them what they want to hear and not give them objective advice for the good of the country and the good of their job. And sometimes the media is guilty of that too. You know, early in the Obama administration, we saw that. You know, we lived it with a fawning media that essentially gave them a pass. We're happy to be a part of history. We're getting tingles up their leg, and we're happy to kind of go along to get along. And so I think Mike's right. I think the pushback now, unfortunately, it's not because of the issues. It's because of the way they've been treated. You know, we still see, you know, the IRS scandal, you know, not getting the treatment it really deserves, not the in-depth examination that it deserves. And, you know, while, you know, Scott, you know, the nothing burger of a Scott Walker issue with these emails, you know, blows up because they want to see Republicans in crisis. And so is it going to change? I'm skeptical. I don't think so. Not in the foreseeable future.
And on that positive note, thank you very much. Guys, thank you so much. Michael, Andy, Jim, and Paul, thank you.